Ancient Egyptian civilization is a fascinating topic. We're just going to give a brief overview of it here in this lecture through an examination of their society. We'll specifically be looking at their social structures, their religion, and then give a brief overview of their political history. The first thing we'll do is look at the geographic setting of ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptian civilization is all based around the Nile River, which is in North Africa. It cuts through the Sahara Desert, and you can see in the picture up there the impact that has on the landscape. The area around the Nile River is very fertile and is very conducive to farming. So the Nile River is where the society is based around. It also provides a fair amount of protection from invaders. All of the benefits of being around a river that we discussed in the last lecture, the ancient Egyptian civilization has those advantages by being based around the Nile River. The Nile River itself is the longest river in the world. For the ancient Egyptians, it was what provided them with, again, with food, with the ability to have their farms. It was their highway. It was everything to them. There are ancient Egyptian songs where they're talking about the Nile almost like it's a deity. So the Nile River, the importance of the Nile River in ancient Egyptian civilization can't be overstated. It was the center of their universe. The waters of the Nile flow north, and just before it empties out into the Mediterranean Sea, the Nile splits in two. And above that, between the split and the Mediterranean Sea, that's the Nile Delta. That's a very, very fertile region, and that region is called Lower Egypt because that's where the water, empties out into the Mediterranean. South of that split, that's called Upper Egypt. So it made sense from an Egyptian perspective that you're up if you put something in the water and it flows down to Lower Egypt. But confusingly on a map, that means Lower Egypt is in the north and Upper Egypt is in the south. That's the geographic breakdown of ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptians were polytheistic. Remember, that means that they believed in many gods. They did believe in an afterlife, and they believed that your actions on earth affected what happened to you in the afterlife, but they also believed that in addition to morality, there were also specific things or spells and various things that you had to do in order to ensure a happy afterlife. As far as political history goes, historians divide ancient Egyptian history into three different periods. They're really simply titled the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. And what these periods just represent is, this long period of time where these rulers are ruling Egypt and where things are sort of centralized. You might notice that there are some gaps in between each of the kingdoms. There are some years where it seems like no kingdom is ruling, and that in fact was the case. The Old Kingdom collapses, and then there's like a period of chaos, lots of infighting, lots of anarchy, and then the next kingdom rises up, and then you got the Middle Kingdom. So that's the broadest of broad overviews of ancient Egyptian history. It's broken up into three kingdoms with periods of fighting in between. The very first ruler of the Old Kingdom is Menes, King Menes. He's the one who unites Lower and Upper Egypt, conquers them both, unites them together, and creates the beginnings of ancient Egypt. Menes creates the first ruling Egyptian dynasty. Now, what a dynasty is, and this doesn't just apply to Egypt, it applies to all the civilizations we'll study, is a dynasty is a family that passes down the kingship or pharaohship or just the rulership from one generation to the next. So the rulership of the place is inherited within the family. So the dynasty lasts for as long as that family's in control. And then if somebody else comes along and pushes that family out and they get in control, now you've got a new dynasty. An Egyptian ruler, by the way, wasn't usually called a king or queen. They were called pharaohs. That was the Egyptian word for ruler. And they were sort of intertwined in their religion as well. It was believed that the pharaohs were sort of divine and that when they died, they became sort of like one of the gods. But Menes and the other rulers didn't just rule with the help of their family. They also created what's called a bureaucracy. Again, this is a definition that goes for all the civilizations we'll study. That's this administrative organization that has regular officials, regular rules, and like a professional class that helps to sort of enforce the rules, the tax codes, the other things that the ruler wants to enforce. It's sort of a necessary thing to have if you're a ruler over a very large, very complex area. If you want to enforce your laws, you're going to need a bureaucracy, and the Egyptian pharaohs had that. At the head of that bureaucracy was an official known as a vizier. You've probably all heard of ancient Egyptian mummies. They were real. They really would mummify people. That is to say, they would dry the body so that it wouldn't rot. This would only be for nobles and rich people and pharaohs and stuff like that. And the reason that they would do that, it was part of their religion. They thought that it helped the complicated process of getting to the good place in the afterlife. They believed that it was sort of difficult to get to the good spot in the Egyptian afterlife, and so you needed to do various things. One of the helpful things was to mummify the body, so that's what they did. Speaking of mummies, there used to be mummies inside the pyramids at Giza that you see here. Giza is just a place where these really big pyramids are. The pyramids were built by Old Kingdom pharaohs as burial places. There are chambers inside the pyramids where their mummies used to be. They were raided long ago, stolen long ago by thieves, but the pharaohs actually were buried inside of these gigantic pyramids that they built for their own glory, so that everybody would remember them forever. The Old Kingdom doesn't last forever, nothing does. It collapses, there's this big period of chaos and fighting, and then the Middle Kingdom rises up. They think they're going to last forever, but they don't. The High Coast people here, they invade, and the Middle Kingdom collapses. And this group here rules Egypt for a little while, and they introduce the Egyptians to a couple different technologies, including chariots. They sort of teach them how to use chariots, and that wasn't the best idea, because the Egyptians use that knowledge, turn it around on them, and get them out of town, and then the Egyptians get their kingdom back, and they start the New Kingdom, which is the period of the most prosperity. It's the period when the Egyptian empire is at its largest and richest. The New Kingdom has a couple notable pharaohs that I would just like to highlight for you. There are many more pharaohs than this, but we have a limited amount of time. One of them is Hatshepsut. She is the first female pharaoh, and by all accounts this very effective ruler and very impressive figure in Egyptian history. The pharaoh Akhenaten is very famous for his attempt to change the Egyptian religion and make it monotheistic, to focus only on the worship of the sun god and to get rid of all the other gods. Ultimately, Akhenaten is unsuccessful. After he dies, King Tutankhamun, another pharaoh you're probably familiar with, he reinstates all the other gods and brings the religion back to its ancient roots. Pharaoh Tutankhamun is also very famous in that his tomb wasn't found by tomb raiders, by grave robbers, like so many of the other pharaohs were. So his tomb looks a lot like a lot of them probably looked originally, full of splendor and great jewelry and gold and all sorts of stuff. So his tomb is very fascinating to historians for that reason. Ramses II, or Ramses the Great, is probably the last pharaoh, the last great pharaoh who rules over a period of riches and prosperity. Things had already come on hard times by the time Ramses II showed up, but his is sort of the last burst of activity where they're actually sort of conquering some places and beating some people. After him, it's all downhill until the New Kingdom collapses. Egyptian society was structured like a pyramid, just like the pyramids they've got. The pharaoh at the top, his government officials under him, then merchants, and then the majority of the population were farmers, just sort of regular run-of-the-mill workers. The most famous ancient Egyptian writing is called hieroglyphics. You see it pictured here. And this is famous for the fact that in hieroglyphics, every character represents a word, whereas in the English alphabet, every character represents a sound that, together form a word. But this wasn't the most common form of ancient Egyptian writing. Hieroglyphics was what they used for very official things, like the writings on tombs and just, carving into stone. This wasn't what they would use for regular writing. This is what they used for regular writing.